I absolutely love rock climbing. I also love learning about ecology and how humans connect to other living things on this planet. So for today's video, I am going to combine my passions together and learn from some of the best climbers in the world, who just so happen to be part of the group of species that make up our closest living relatives, primates. So first off, what are primates? Primates are a group of organisms that include some well-known members such as humans, apes, and monkeys, as well as some less well-known members like tarsiers, lemurs, lorises, and bush babies. There's no single trait that characterizes this group as a whole. Instead, there's a group of traits that all members exhibit to some degree, which make up what scientists call the primate pattern. Many of the anatomical and sensory traits in this pattern are related to the ability to climb trees. The evolution of primates is closely tied to their ability to exploit a complex three-dimensional arboreal environment. Living in trees is extremely challenging in comparison to terrestrial environments because of its unpredictable changes in the availability and stability of supports. If being in trees is so difficult, then why did the earliest primates decide to leave the ground? There are many theories, but the most notable one is the angiosperm exploitation hypothesis. This theory explains that early primates evolved around the same time as another group of organisms, the angiosperms, which are a group of plants that produce flowers and fruits. A large part of the diet of today's living primates consists of some part of angiosperm plants, whether it's the leaves, fruits, seeds, or gum. As a result, it's likely that ancient primates also heavily relied on this resource. Primates are very important seed dispersers today, and this close relationship over millions of years likely resulted in a case of coevolution, where each group influenced the adaptation of certain traits in the other group. The traits that primates evolved from this interaction included becoming visually oriented, which allowed them to determine the ripeness of fruits, as well as grasping hands and feet, which are important to being able to reach the terminal branches and manipulate both fruits and edible insects that were also attracted to these resources. The first primates were very small, so the energetic costs associated with climbing were not much different than other kinds of movement, like quadrupedal walking. As a result of the complexity of an arboreal habitat, primates have evolved a generalized body structure suitable for a wide range of movement types that is more varied than any other mammal. This is actually quite unique, since there are many other mammals, like rodents and possums, that inhabit arboreal environments as well. But these species have only retained basic quadrupedal forms of locomotion. The difference in movement patterns seems to be related to the anatomical features of the hand. Other arboreal mammals rely on their claws, which provide constant contact with the support while climbing. Primates, on the other hand, have nails. Some primates have claws as well, but all have at least one nail on their fingers or toes. Unlike claws, nails can't dig into the bark of trees, which means that their hands have to continuously adapt their positioning and grip when moving. But what exactly is the difference between claws and nails? And why would primates have evolved a hand that's much more complicated to climb with? To answer the first part of the question, both claws and nails are made of a hard organic substance called keratin. This is also what makes up horns and hair. However, nails and claws are shaped differently due to the differences in the shape of the bone at the end of an organism's digits. Claws are cone-shaped, pointed, and grow directly out of the end of the phalanx bones. They are good for puncturing, but they make grabbing objects difficult, thus reducing the capacity for fine motor dexterity. Nails, on the other hand, are widened, flattened, and only cover the top of the surface of the bones. Nails are probably a derived feature that evolved at the same time as the digits of primates got wider. This widening allowed them to more effectively grip narrow branches at the terminal parts of trees. The widening of digits also improved their sensitivity by allowing a more subtle detection of changes in pressure of branches, which allowed primates to avoid breaking them off and falling to their death. Positional behavior is a term used to describe body postures with movements. It's defined with regards to the number of weight-bearing body parts, like limbs or a tail, and whether each body part appears to be under predominantly tensile or compressive stress regimes. Climbing is a positional behavior defined as ascent on an angle of 45 degrees or greater. Vertical climbing is not that frequent in primates, who more often employ clambering. This is a type of climbing defined as moving obliquely or at a slant of less than 90 degrees through a network of branches. There are about 3 major strategies that primates use to move through the trees, and each one is associated with specific anatomical adaptations. The first category is quadrupedal walking, which is employed above branches by small and medium-bodied primates, like bush babies and monkeys, using all 4 limbs. These primates have arms and legs of roughly equal size, as well as narrow and deep chests. They also have a laterally placed scapula, which results in forward-facing shoulder joints that restrict full extension of the arms upwards. Some primates, like guenons, use their hind and forelimbs equally to power movement, whereas others are hind limb dominated, like langurs and colobus monkeys, and employ a lot of leaping. Old World monkeys commonly use a quadrupedal strategy called pulse climbing. This is a type of vertical climbing facilitated by multiple leaps where the hind limbs propel the primate upwards and the arms stretch out to reach a higher support. Another subtype is the slow climbing employed by lorises and podos, which have long contact times with the substrate and rely on their front limbs to produce as much of the force needed to propel themselves forward. Primate quadrupedalism differs from other mammalian quadrupedalism because it employs a diagonal sequence gait pattern: right hind limb, left forelimb, left hind limb, then right forelimb, and repeat, rather than a lateral sequence gait pattern, which is right hind limb, right forelimb, left hind limb, left forelimb. This diagonal sequence allows primates to keep balance on branches by maintaining their body's center of gravity directly below them. If they were to use a lateral sequence gait, there would be a moment during movement where the body leans more towards one side, which increases the risk of toppling over. Another positional behavior employed mainly by prosimians, which is an ancient group of primates and includes species such as lemurs, indries, tarsiers, and bush babies, is called vertical clinging and leaping. The animal begins at rest with its torso upright and clinging to a vertical support. Then it pushes off with its hind limbs and enters an extended period of free flight before it lands on another support with its hind feet first. This type of movement is employed by small-bodied primates that live in the understory and spend a lot of time on small saplings or trees with few horizontal branches. For this reason, vertical clinging and leaping is an effective way of crossing large gaps between one tree to another. Some important anatomical traits associated with vertical clinging and leaping include relatively long legs and feet, which are important to generate enough force to propel themselves, as well as dissipate mechanical shock over a larger area after landing. The last category of positional behavior is called suspension, which involves traveling below the branches with an orthograde or upright posture. This type of movement relies primarily on the forelimbs, but sometimes a prehensile tail or the hind limbs are used as well. It is mostly used by apes, yet some New World monkeys, like spider monkeys, also employ it. Suspension takes advantage of pendulum mechanics to conserve energy by using the momentum from the previous swing to power the next one in a sequence. Suspension increases safety for larger-bodied primates since they can't really lose their balance because they have essentially already fallen off the support. The anatomical traits that suspensory primates share are a broad and narrow trunk with a dorsally placed scapula that pushes the shoulder to the sides of the body. Note how this trunkal position differs from quadrupedal primates. This is the reason why suspensory apes and some New World monkeys have a larger range of motion in their shoulders. These species also have relatively longer forearms and fingers, allowing for better grip and the adequate muscle strength necessary to maintain that position. Brachiation is the most extreme form of suspensory locomotion. It involves hand over hand, below branch movement without aid from the hind limbs or tail. There are two forms. The first is continuous contact brachiation, during which primates always have hand contact with the supports. The second is called rhicoketal brachiation, and it involves a phase of propulsion through the air with no contact with the support. During climbing, the force acting against the primate is gravity, which has to be opposed by the sum of the tension and compression forces exerted by their hands and or feet in order to stay on the support. It takes the same amount of energy to lift 1 kilogram of body mass, no matter the organism size. However, the heavier the body mass, the greater the total amount of energy is required to lift the organism. That means it's more energetically expensive to climb for larger-bodied primates compared to smaller ones. If arboreal environments are so energetically demanding, why did some primates, like apes, evolve larger body sizes? It is theorized that it gave them a competitive advantage over smaller primates, like monkeys, for access to the same resources in the environments they cohabit. One of the strategies that large-bodied primates have evolved to cope with these energetic demands is by remembering specific routes in the canopy. This involves repeated use of the same branches, which indicates prior knowledge of branch stability. This information is used to reduce the risk of falling and to optimize positional behavior to fit the mechanical properties of the substrate. In contrast, smaller monkeys experience minimal branch deflection, which means they have more safe route choices that they can take, so there's little incentive to memorize specific routes. For them, climbing is less energetically and cognitively demanding. This is hypothesized to account for part of the reason why apes are more intelligent. They have to be able to plan or remember a route in advance and visualize upcoming movements in order to minimize the risk of falling or of wasting energy. So now we're going to take a closer look at some species in specific that are particularly good at a certain climbing style. Tarsiers are highly specialized for vertical clinging and leaping. In fact, they have the longest hind limbs relative to their body size of any primate. However, they're pretty small, meaning their absolute hind limb length is also small compared to other primates. This means they must exert larger takeoff forces relative to their body mass in order to cross similar distance leaps compared to larger primates. Because the branches that they are launching off of are flexible, tarsiers apply energy both to themselves and the branch below during takeoff. This can lead to elastic rebound in the branch, causing destabilization and reducing the velocity of the jump. Unless oscillation terminates before takeoff, up to half of the energy generated will be lost. To combat this issue, tarsiers have been found to be quite selective with their choice of supports in order to maximize the force of takeoff and minimize the mechanical shock of landing. In specific, tarsiers prefer to leap from large diameter supports which are more rigid. In this way, they minimize the amount of energy that is lost to the substrate upon takeoff. They also preferentially choose to land on small diameter supports in order to exploit their compliance. Gibbons are the most acrobatic among primates. They are also known as lesser apes because they are smaller than other apes. However, their size actually helps make them the best brachiators among primates. In fact, they are the only ones to substantially perform rhicoketal brachiation. What makes them so proficient at this form of locomotion is their unique anatomical features, including relatively long forearms compared to body size, long, hook-like fingers, and a true ball and socket joint allowing for 180-degree rotation of the wrist. Brachiation is a highly efficient form of travel among the canopy because it employs pendulum mechanics, which take advantage of the force of gravity and passively transfers potential energy to translational kinetic energy. When moving from one hole to the next, kinetic energy can be lost during the transfer. This is called a tension collision and can be best described using the analogy of a child on a swing. When the swing arc becomes too high, gravity will draw the center of mass of the individual down through the arc in such a way that the pendulum swing is disturbed. This is experienced as a jerk in the motion when the chains of the swing experience tension. This results in a discontinuous motion that substantially reduces the velocity of the swing afterwards. During brachiation, this tension collision is minimized by timing the transition from one hold to the next in such a way that the end of one arc coincides with the beginning of the next. Finally, I want to dive into the climbing strategies used by one of humans' closest related species, the orangutan. Orangutans are the largest living arboreal primates. Although gorillas are larger and do still climb trees, they spend most of their time on the ground, and so they can't really be classified as arboreal. Orangutans, however, spend a lot of time in the trees and have developed some unique climbing strategies that help compensate for their heaviness. One such strategy is called quadrimanual locomotion, which consists of always having 3 points of contact with the branches. The fourth limb is used to test the structure before moving forward. This distributes body mass more widely and reduces stress on a single limb. They also make small, subtle adjustments in their body position or hand-foot placement in order to change which support bears the most weight. In this way, they reduce the risk that a branch would give out or that it would be so flexible that the oscillating force generated would make it more difficult to balance. Sometimes, however, they use this oscillation to their advantage. During tree sway, orangutans take advantage of the flexibility of branches by moving them back and forth and using the force generated to catapult themselves across gaps in the canopy. Because of their large size, they can generate quite a substantial amount of elastic energy. This method of crossing gaps seems to be the most energetically efficient choice for orangutans compared to leaping or descending to the ground and climbing the next tree. Orangutans are generally cautious and slow climbers. However, they clearly have the potential for fast and acrobatic locomotion. Leaps, quadrupedal runs, and rump-first cascade descents are commonly used when fleeing aggressive situations, mostly by juveniles. Juvenile orangutans are unique because they have the greatest muscle in their pedal digital flexors, both in comparison to adult male orangutans and to other apes. A secure pedal grip may be more important in wild juveniles than adults, as they exhibit fast and risky movements more often than do more mature orangutans. This suggests that orangutans become more cautious in their locomotion as they age due to the increased risk of death associated with falling with a larger body mass. Another reason for their slowness could be due to a trade-off of having extremely flexible limbs. Although this allows them to stabilize and maneuver well, their limbs are probably not robust enough to withstand the impact forces generated by sudden speed changes. So how does the climbing ability of modern humans compare to that of other primates? It has been found that humans have only partially lost the ability to climb. Our feet have gone through some major changes in order to optimize for bipedal walking. Our toes have gotten shorter and most of the foot's prehensile ability is gone. This is disadvantageous when it comes to gripping substrate for additional support. However, an anthropological study of Twa hunter-gatherer groups found in Central Africa, who commonly climb trees to access resources such as honey, found that these people exhibit extraordinary ankle dorsiflexion when vertically climbing small diameter supports. The range of dorsiflexion, which is the movement of flexing your toes back towards your shin, can be greater than 45 degrees, which is in the same range exhibited by chimpanzees. Not only that, but the method they use to climb these trees, which consists of putting the plantar surface of the foot directly on the trunk and walking upward, with the arms and legs advancing alternately, is also the same one employed by chimps climbing similar sized trees. This indicates that although our feet have lost some climbing characteristics so that they're better for bipedal walking, our foot physiology and movement patterns are still very much useful for climbing. Furthermore, the physical structure of our hands, forearms, and shoulders are still very much adapted to climbing locomotion as well, especially suspension. Although the primary form of locomotion in humans is bipedalism, there's increasing evidence that supports the idea that this form of movement is functionally quite similar to vertical climbing. The vertical climbing hypothesis argues that our hominin ancestors, like Australopithecus afarensis, did not pass through a knuckle walking phase like previously suggested. Instead, vertical climbing was a direct pre-adaptation to bipedalism. Evidence shows that human bipedalism is kinematically similar to vertical climbing and suspension than it is to knuckle walking. This is because vertical climbing and suspension require orthograde trunk postures and extended hip and knee positions very similar to modern human bipedalism. Furthermore, bipedalism in non-human primates is most common in orangutans and siamings, which are species that employ a lot of suspensory climbing. In addition, the proximal femur of orangutans is more similar to humans compared to the African apes. However, not all vertical climbing is equally as pre-adaptive. Research has found that the vertical climbing of the suspensory spider monkey is closer to human bipedalism than the vertical climbing of the quadrupedal macaque. This reinforces the importance of an orthograde or upright posture to facilitate bipedalism. There is also increasing anthropological evidence that early hominins may have evolved in less of a savanna or semi-arid bushland environment and more of a moist woodland habitat, further reinforcing the idea that there were ample opportunities to climb trees. I went into this project hoping that learning about how other primates climb, it would help me get some insight on new techniques I could use to improve my own rock climbing ability. However, I've learned that rock climbing is biomechanically much different than climbing flexible substrates, like tree branches. The main difference is that when you apply a vertical force onto a branch, the force available to propel yourself is minimized due to partially being converted into elastic energy that oscillates the branch. On the other hand, rigid substances like rocks don't move, or at least you hope they don't, which means that the majority of the vertical force being applied is available to maximize the push-off force. That being said, I do think some general insights can be applied to rock climbing. Planning your route and visualizing what positions your body will be in is just as important to conserve energy in humans who rock climb as it is for large apes moving through the canopy. Vertical clinging and leaping is also used to some extent by rock climbers, who call the move dinos, and is employed to get to holds that are just out of normal reach. Suspension and brachiation are also used when traversing arches and overhang walls. So although the climbing medium is different, humans still use similar movements and muscles to climb as a result of our common ancestry with other primates.